Hello and welcome to the Whispering Worlds channel. How do you think James felt the moment he discovered the betrayal? What do you think pushed him to choose self-discovery over revenge? How might the relationship between James, Sarah, and Ethan play out after the truth comes to light? Do you believe building a happy future after experiencing such a deep betrayal is possible? If you were in James' shoes, how would you handle the situation? My name is James Miller, and I never thought my world could shatter on what seemed like an ordinary day. It was a sunny Thursday afternoon, and I was buried in paperwork at the office. Deadlines loomed, but nothing felt out of the ordinary. Ethan Brooks, my business partner, and I had been grinding for years to make our financial consulting firm a success. Business was booming, and on the surface, so was my life. Then my phone buzzed. Normally, I'd have ignored it while working, but for some reason, I glanced at the screen. The message was from an unknown number. It said, "James, you should know your wife isn't who you think she is." My heart stopped for a moment. My first instinct was to dismiss it as spam. But the message came with attachments, photos. Curiosity got the better of me, though my gut screamed at me not to open them. Against my better judgment, I clicked on the images. There she was, Sarah, my wife. The woman I had loved for a decade, held through the ups and downs, and trusted with my life. She wasn't alone in the pictures. She was in the arms of Ethan, my best friend and business partner. They weren't just friendly photos either. They were kissing in one. Another showed them at what appeared to be a cabin, wrapped up in each other like they were the only two people in the world. I felt like someone had slammed a hammer into my chest. My stomach turned, and I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just the affair itself that crushed me. It was the scale of the betrayal. My wife, my best friend. How could they do this to me? The rest of the day passed in a haze. I sat at my desk, staring blankly at my computer screen. Couldn't think, couldn't focus. My phone buzzed again with another text from the same number. "They've been doing this for months. Ask your wife about her work trips." The world tilted. I'd always believed Sarah's occasional weekend trips were legitimate work obligations. Was this person telling the truth? I needed to know. When I finally left the office, I felt like a man walking to his own execution. Chapter 2. Confrontations. The drive home felt surreal. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My thoughts raced as I rehearsed what I'd say to Sarah. Would she deny it? Would she try to gaslight me? Or worse, would she admit it without a shred of remorse? When I walked through the front door, Sarah was in the kitchen, humming softly as she chopped vegetables. The normalcy of the scene was almost laughable. For a moment, I just stood there, watching her, wondering how she could act so at ease while living a double life. "Hey, babe," she said, turning to smile at me. "Dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes. How was your day?" "Sarah," I said, my voice unsteady. "We need to talk." She looked up, her smile faltering. "What's wrong?" I pulled my phone out of my pocket, opened the photos, and slid it across the counter toward her. Her eyes widened as she took in the images. For a few seconds, she just stared, her face draining of color. "James?" she started, but I cut her off. Don't even try to explain yet. Just tell me the truth. How long has this been going on?" Her lips trembled. "It's not what it looks like. Don't lie to me," I shouted, slamming my hand on the counter. She jumped, tears welling up in her eyes. "6 months," she whispered. "It's been 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of deceit." I felt like the floor was falling out from under me. "Why?" I demanded. "Was it something I did? Something I didn't do?" "It wasn't like that," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't plan for this to happen. It just... Ethan was there for me when I felt like you weren't." "When I wasn't?" I repeated incredulously. "I was working my ass off for us, Sarah. For our future. And while I was doing that, you were screwing my best friend." Her silence was deafening. I turned and walked out of the house before I said something I couldn't take back. The morning after confronting Sarah, I barely slept. My mind raced with thoughts of betrayal, anger, and confusion. But I knew one thing for certain. I needed to face Ethan. Avoiding him wasn't an option. If I wanted to move forward, I had to address the man I had once considered a brother. When I walked into the office, my employees greeted me with the usual smiles and nods. I forced a polite response, though my insides churned with dread. Ethan's office door was slightly ajar, and I could see him laughing on a phone call. The sight of his easy demeanor made my blood boil. How could he sit there, joking around, after destroying my life? I pushed the door open hard enough that it slammed against the wall. Ethan jumped, quickly ending his call. "James?" he said, his voice tinged with surprise, and maybe fear. "What's going on?" I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me. Without a word, I pulled my phone out, opened the photos, and threw it onto his desk. He looked down, his face blanching as realization dawned. "James, he began, but I cut him off. "Don't," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Don't you dare try to explain this away." He stood, his hands raised as if to placate me. "Listen, I know how this looks." "How this looks?" I shouted, my composure snapping. "It looks like you've been screwing my wife behind my back for God knows how long. What I want to know is why. How could you do this to me, Ethan? To us?" He flinched at my words, his mouth opening and closing as he searched for an answer. Finally, he said, "I didn't mean for this to happen, James. It was a mistake. A horrible mistake." "A mistake," I repeated, incredulous. "A mistake is forgetting someone's birthday, Ethan. A 6-month affair with my wife is not a mistake. It's a goddamn choice." Ethan sank back into his chair, his head in his hands. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "Sorry?" I laughed bitterly. "You're sorry? Do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed my marriage. You've destroyed our friendship. Hell, you've destroyed this company." He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "James, I never wanted to hurt you. I don't even know how it got this far." "Well, let me make one thing clear," I said, my voice low but firm. "You're out. Effective immediately." Ethan's eyes widened. "James, you can't do that. This is our company. You don't have the authority to just kick me out." "Watch me," I said, leaning over his desk. "If you think I'm going to keep working with you after this, you're delusional. Pack your things and get out. If you're not gone by the end of the day, I'll have security escort you out." For a moment he just stared at me, as if trying to gauge whether I was serious. Then, without another word, he began gathering his belongings. As I turned to leave, he called after me. "James, wait. Please. Let me fix this." I paused at the door, my hand on the knob. "There's no fixing this, Ethan. You made your choice. Now you have to live with it." I walked out, slamming the door behind me. But the confrontation didn't bring the closure I'd hoped for. Instead, it left me feeling hollow, as though the betrayal had carved a permanent hole in my chest. The days that followed felt like a waking nightmare. Each morning, I woke up hoping the events of the past week had been some twisted dream, only to be confronted with the harsh reality. My wife had betrayed me, my best friend had betrayed me, and now I was left to pick up the pieces of a life I no longer recognized. I started reaching out to friends, hoping for some semblance of support. But instead of comfort, I was met with more revelations. It began with Mark, an old college buddy. We met at a coffee shop downtown, a place we used to frequent during our carefree 20s. As I stirred my coffee, I asked him point blank, "Mark, did you know about Sarah and Ethan?" He hesitated, his eyes darting to the table. That hesitation was all the answer I needed. "Damn it, Mark," I said, my voice breaking. "You knew, didn't you?" "James, he began, but I cut him off. "How long?" I demanded. "How long have you known?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "A couple of months," he admitted. "But I didn't know how to tell you, man. I thought it wasn't my place." "Not your place," I repeated, my voice rising. "You were supposed to be my friend. Friends don't keep secrets like this." "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to hurt you." "Well, congratulations," I said bitterly. Mission failed. It wasn't just Mark. Over the next few days, I discovered that several people in our social circle had known about the affair. Some claimed they didn't want to get involved. Others said they thought I already knew. Their excuses varied, but the result was the same. I felt utterly alone. Even my parents, whom I'd confided in, didn't seem to fully grasp the depth of my pain. "James," my mother said over the phone, "maybe you should try to forgive Sarah. People make mistakes." "Mistakes?" I snapped. "This wasn't a mistake, Mom. This was a betrayal. How can I forgive that?" "You loved her once," she said gently. "I still do," I admitted, my voice breaking. "And that's what makes this so damn hard." Nights were the worst. Alone in the house that Sarah and I had made a home, I felt the weight of her absence everywhere. The bed felt too big, the silence too loud. I found myself replaying every moment of our marriage, searching for signs I might have missed. Had I been too focused on work? Too distant? Too blind? The questions gnawed at me, keeping me awake until the early hours of the morning. I began drinking more than I should, using alcohol to numb the pain. But no matter how much I drank, the ache remained. One night, as I sat on the couch with a half-empty bottle of whiskey, I found myself staring at a photo album on the coffee table. It was from our wedding day. Sarah looked so beautiful in her white dress, her eyes full of love and joy. I couldn't reconcile the woman in those photos with the one who had betrayed me. I slammed the album shut and hurled it across the room. The sound of it hitting the wall was oddly satisfying, but it didn't bring the release I craved. Nothing did. Therapy wasn't a magic fix. It wasn't like I walked into Dr. Carter's office and came out an hour later feeling like a new man. No, it was slow, painful, and grueling work. Every session felt like peeling back a layer of my soul, exposing wounds I hadn't even realized were there. In one session, Dr. Carter asked me to recount how I found out about Sarah's affair in as much detail as I could. At first, I resisted. Reliving that day felt like stabbing myself all over again. But she was patient, her calm voice encouraging me to keep going. When I saw the photos, I said, my voice tight, it felt like someone had just ripped the ground out from under me. My first thought wasn't even anger. It was disbelief. Like, this couldn't be real. This couldn't be my life. Dr. Carter nodded, her expression empathetic. That disbelief is a common reaction to trauma, James. It's your mind's way of protecting you from the full weight of the pain all at once. We spent weeks unpacking not just the betrayal, but everything leading up to it. I told her about the late nights at the office, the arguments Sarah and I had about how little time we spent together, and the ways I'd brushed off her concerns. "It's not your fault, James," Dr. Carter said one day after I admitted feeling guilty for not noticing Sarah's unhappiness. "Her actions were her choice. You can acknowledge your role in the relationship without taking responsibility for her betrayal." That was a hard pill to swallow. Part of me wanted to believe it was all her fault, that she was the villain and I was the innocent victim. But therapy forced me to confront the shades of gray. I wasn't perfect. I had been distant at times, more focused on work than on her. That didn't excuse what she did, but it helped me understand the cracks in our marriage. One breakthrough came when Dr. Carter asked me to visualize my life without the pain. "What would it look like, James?" she asked, her voice steady but probing. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine it. At first, the image was blurry, like a photo out of focus. But slowly, it began to take shape. I saw myself smiling again, laughing with friends, maybe even falling in love someday. It wasn't a perfect picture, but it was enough to remind me that healing was possible. The journal started out as a reluctant exercise, something Dr. Carter had suggested during one of our sessions. I wasn't a writer, and the idea of pouring my feelings onto paper felt awkward and unnatural. But late one night, when the silence in the house became unbearable, I pulled out an old spiral notebook and a pen. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the blank page for what felt like hours. Finally, I wrote, "I don't know where to start." It wasn't profound, but it was true. For the first few nights, that's all I managed, short, disjointed thoughts scrawled in messy handwriting. She betrayed me. I can't stop thinking about it. Why did Ethan do this? Why didn't he just walk away? Was I not good enough? Did I work too much? Did I miss the signs? As the days turned into weeks, the words began to flow more freely. I started treating the journal like a conversation with myself, a place where I could be brutally honest without fear of judgment. One entry stood out. I keep going back to the day we met. She was wearing that yellow dress, the one that made her look like she was glowing. I remember thinking she was too good for me. Maybe she was. Or maybe I just convinced myself of that and stopped trying to be the man she deserved. Did I push her away? Or was she always capable of this, and I just didn't see it? Writing became my nightly ritual. After work, after dinner, after the TV was off and the world was quiet, I would sit down with the notebook and let my thoughts spill out. One night, I wrote a letter to Sarah. Not to send, but to get my feelings out. Dear Sarah, I don't even know where to start. I want to hate you. Sometimes I think I do. But then I remember all the good times, the way you used to look at me, the way you laughed when I told a stupid joke, and I feel like a fool. How could you destroy all of that? How could you take the best parts of my life and turn them into lies? I hope it was worth it. I hope he was worth it. Because you've lost me forever. Another time I wrote a letter to Ethan. Dear Ethan, you were my brother. You were supposed to be the one person I could trust with anything. I trusted you with my business, my secrets, my life. And you threw it all away. I want to know why, but I know I'll never get an answer that satisfies me. Maybe you didn't think about me at all. Maybe you didn't care. I don't know which is worse. I hope you see what you've done and regret it for the rest of your life. Some nights, the journal became a place for reflection. I started writing about my parents, my childhood, and the dreams I once had for my future. When I was a kid, I always thought I'd be the kind of dad who played catch in the backyard and went to every school recital. I thought Sarah and I would have kids by now. I thought we'd have a house filled with laughter. Instead, I'm sitting here in silence, writing to a notebook like it's my only friend. The act of writing began to change me in ways I didn't expect. It forced me to confront not just the betrayal, but the deeper fears and insecurities that had been lurking beneath the surface for years. I started to notice patterns in my entries, recurring themes of self-doubt, anger, and a desperate need for closure. Dr. Carter encouraged me to dig into those patterns during our sessions. James, she said one day, holding up a page I had brought in, you keep asking yourself why you weren't enough for Sarah, but I want you to consider this. What if her actions had nothing to do with you? I frowned. How could they not? I mean, if I had been a better husband. Stop right there, she interrupted gently. You're taking responsibility for something that wasn't your choice. Sarah made her own decisions. Her betrayal isn't a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of her character. Her words stayed with me. For the first time, I started to believe that maybe I wasn't the problem. Maybe I was enough. Maybe Sarah's choices weren't about what I lacked, but about something broken in her. The journal also became a place for small victories. I started tracking moments of progress, no matter how insignificant they seemed at the time. Had a good day at work today. Didn't think about her once during the meeting. Went for a run after dinner. Felt good to get out of the house. Laughed with an old friend over coffee. Didn't expect that. Those entries were like breadcrumbs leading me out of the darkness. They reminded me that healing wasn't a straight line, but a journey filled with ups and downs. One night, as I flipped back through the pages, I realized how far I had come. The early entries were filled with raw pain, but the later ones carried a sense of hope. It wasn't that the pain had disappeared. It was still there, lurking in the background, but it no longer consumed me. I closed the notebook and sat back in my chair, a faint smile tugging at my lips. For the first time in months, I felt like I was starting to reclaim my life. When Sarah asked to meet, I almost said no. Part of me didn't want to see her, didn't want to face the storm of emotions I knew would come with it. But another part of me, the part that still loved her, no matter how much I hated what she'd done, needed closure. We met at the park on a gray, overcast day. She was sitting on a bench when I arrived, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. As I approached, she looked up, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. "Hi, James," she said softly. "Hi, Sarah," I replied, my voice steady but guarded. We sat in silence for a few moments, the sounds of children playing in the distance filling the space between us. Finally, she spoke. "I don't even know where to start," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out how I let it get this far. And the truth is, I don't have a good answer. I was selfish. I was stupid. And I hurt the one person I never wanted to hurt." Her words cut deep, but there was something raw and honest in her tone that I couldn't ignore. "I loved you, Sarah," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "I still do in some ways, but you didn't just hurt me. You destroyed the trust we built our marriage on. I don't know how to come back from that." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand, and I don't blame you for not wanting to try. I needed you to know how sorry I am." We talked for hours, revisiting the good times, the bad times, and everything in between. By the time we parted ways, I felt a strange sense of peace. It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely, but it was a step toward letting go. Rebuilding my life wasn't a single decision or a moment of clarity. It was a series of small, deliberate choices, each one a step forward, no matter how insignificant it seemed at the time. The first step was reclaiming my house. After Sarah moved out, the place felt like a museum of our life together. Her perfume lingered in the air, her books still lined the shelves, and every room was filled with memories. For weeks, I avoided the bedroom entirely, choosing to sleep on the couch instead. One Saturday morning, I woke up with a strange determination. I grabbed a box from the garage and started packing away everything that reminded me of her. The framed photos on the mantel, the coffee mug she used every morning, even the throw pillows she'd insisted on buying. I wasn't angry as I did it, just resolved. These things belonged to a chapter of my life that was over, and it was time to move on. I also repainted the walls. It was a small change, but it made a big difference. The soft beige Sarah had chosen gave way to a deep, rich blue. My choice this time. Standing in the freshly painted living room, I felt a strange sense of ownership, as if I were reclaiming not just my house, but my life. The company. Work became my anchor during those early days. With Ethan gone, I had to shoulder the full weight of running the business. It was overwhelming at first. Clients were asking questions, employees were on edge, and the financial strain of buying out Ethan's share loomed over everything. But in a way, the chaos was a blessing. It gave me something to focus on besides my pain. I threw myself into the work, staying late at the office and personally meeting with every client to reassure them that the company was stable. I also took the opportunity to reshape the business. Ethan and I had always butted heads over the company's direction, with him favoring high-risk, high-reward ventures and me preferring a steadier approach. With him gone, I was free to implement my vision. I hired new staff, reorganized our workflow, and diversified our services. It was exhausting, but it was also invigorating. For the first time in months, I felt like I was building something instead of just trying to survive. One evening, as I locked up the office after another long day, I looked around and felt a flicker of pride. The company wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. And so was I, in my own way, reconnecting with friends. One of the hardest parts of the betrayal was losing faith in the people around me. I had cut ties with anyone who had known about Sarah and Ethan's affair and stayed silent, which left me with a much smaller social circle. At first, I avoided reaching out to anyone. I didn't want to risk more disappointment. But as the months went by, I realized that isolation wasn't the answer. I started reconnecting with old friends, people who had no ties to Sarah or Ethan. One of those friends was Alex, a guy I hadn't seen since college. We met for lunch at a local diner, and within minutes, it felt like no time had passed. "Man, you look like you've been through the ringer," Alex said, half joking. "You have no idea," I replied with a wry smile. Over burgers and fries, I told him everything. To my surprise, he didn't offer platitudes or try to fix anything. He just listened, nodding occasionally and letting me vent. Sounds like you've been carrying a lot on your shoulders, he said when I finished. But hey, you're still standing. That's something. It wasn't profound, but it was exactly what I needed to hear. Rediscovering myself. As I started rebuilding my social life, I also began rediscovering the parts of myself I had neglected during my marriage. I took up hiking again, something I hadn't done in years. There was something therapeutic about being out in nature, away from the noise and distractions of everyday life. One weekend, I tackled a trail I used to love, a steep, winding path that led to a breathtaking overlook. As I stood at the summit, looking out over the valley below, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in months. I also started cooking, a hobby I'd always enjoyed but had let slip over the years. At first, it was just simple meals, spaghetti, stir-fry, grilled chicken. But as I grew more confident, I began experimenting with new recipes. One night, I invited a few friends over for dinner and served homemade lasagna. "This is amazing," Alex said, helping himself to a second plate. "Don't tell me you've been hiding culinary skills all these years," another friend chimed in. I laughed, realizing how good it felt to host people in my home again. Meeting Claire. One of the most unexpected parts of my journey was meeting Claire. It happened at a bar one Friday night. I had gone out with a few friends, not expecting much beyond a few drinks and some laughs. But then she walked in, and everything changed. Claire was nothing like Sarah. She had a sharp wit, a loud laugh, and an energy that seemed to fill the room. We struck up a conversation at the bar, and before I knew it, hours had passed. "You're funny," she said, smiling as she sipped her drink. "You're the first person to tell me that in a long time," I replied, half joking. We exchanged numbers that night, and though I wasn't ready to dive into anything serious, our connection gave me hope. Finding peace. Months turned into a year, and life slowly began to feel normal again. My house felt like my own. My business was thriving. My friendships were stronger than ever. One evening, as I sat on the porch with a beer in hand, I thought about how far I had come. The pain of Sarah and Ethan's betrayal hadn't disappeared, but it no longer defined me. I had faced the storm, weathered it, and come out stronger on the other side. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.